join us both in person and online. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our Director of the City Futures Research Centre, Professor Prof, Pettit, who's going to present to us today on the Australian Housing Data Analytics Platform, which has just finished its first phase. So a big milestone, and he's going to let us know where we're up to in the project and what it has found so far. So without further ado, over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Hazel. So it's my pleasure to be presenting for the first seminar of the year here at City Futures for those who are here in the City Analytics Lab and for those who are online. Unfortunately, for those online, you won't be able to join us for drinks afterwards, but we'll have one on behalf of your participation. So I'm going to present today about a 2-year e-research program of work that a number of us at City Futures and a number of collaborators around Australia have been involved in the Australian Housing Data Analytics Platform. And I had the honour to project lead this initiative. So the content I'm going to go through today, well, what's the problem? Why do we need the Australian Housing Data Analytics Platform? The partnership, so how we conceived the infrastructure, the soft infrastructure, just as important as the hard infrastructure, the people and the technology, and applying that to place into, I guess, this wicked problem we're facing around housing. I'm going to go into summarising the data and the analytical solutions that we built. Then what have we achieved over the last couple of years? Reflect on that. Some of the key learnings along the journey, and also welcome others who have been involved in the project when we have the Q&A discussion to also maybe share their reflections so far. And next steps, where do we see this sort of body of work going? Okay, so the problem, broadly speaking, as we all know, and as is constantly in the media, and I think there's a conference on housing this week in Adelaide that's just wrapping up. There was another symposium on precarious housing last week in Sydney. So possibly we won't get all the housing research fraternity because they possibly might have been conferenced out over the last 2 weeks. And here we are Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock talking about the Australian Housing Data Analytics Platform. But we know we are facing increasing pressures globally with access to housing, which is picked up as one of the core goals in the Sustainable Development Goals. So access to housing more broadly, which is bringing about increased housing stress, issues of unaffordability, homelessness, and so forth. And it's got to a point that the last 12 months or so, levels of government and media are labelling this now a crisis. These problems are not new. But I guess when you've got your acceleration of immigration policy and more people moving into cities and looking at what that means and other dynamics, we're facing this crisis. At the same time, we've got National Cabinet driving an agenda of we need another 1.2 million houses to accommodate this growth. We need them in the next 5 years. This is sort of a target set at National Cabinet in August last year. So, okay, that's sort of the immediate next 5 years or one of the dimensions of this problem. So I guess how do we speed up the housing development pipeline? This is, again, one dimension. If we're going to look at that one dimension, what's the data? What's the state of play of planning approvals? What's in the pipeline? And data and evidence can play a valuable role in this. And where do we place this new housing stock? Where do we build it when we're facing increasing pressures of climate change? The Committee for Sydney just released a report today about those natural disasters. I think we've had at least 8 natural disasters the last few years, which is putting more pressure on society. Bridges being washed away, houses being impacted. And look at Lismore, people stranded. So we've got all sorts of challenges. We've got, the median property price in Sydney going up north of 1.5 million. We've got more people in homelessness. We've got houses being impacted by floods and bushfires, etc. At the same time, we're looking at building another 1.2 million houses. So where we're going to put them in well-located areas, but that's easier said than done. So with all these challenges, what sort of data and evidence do researchers have access to sort of test various hypotheses, explore various thought experiments? What do policymakers base their decisions on when they're setting housing targets and so forth? Presumably it's evidence-based, and that is being supported by data, which could be survey-based data, it could be spatial data, it could be big data. So what we've been looking at with RDAP is this sort of data analytics layer, which is one part of this, this nexus, and how we actually look at providing a gateway. So if you're coming in looking at housing policy, you're looking at housing research, you're a mum and dad trying to decide where to buy your house or rent your house, where can I obtain reliable, accurate housing data and analytical solutions? So we look more about the problem from a research perspective, and I mean that broadly. You could be doing research for a policy, you could be doing research for your PhD, you could be doing industry-based research. Where do I get access to housing data? I just want to come back to an article in The Conversation that was written by some colleagues, Laura Cromlin, Bill Randolph, Hazel Eastlope, who's here, Martin Loosemore in 2021. And there's a quote here from their conversation piece I'm just going to read. For many buildings in our sample, we couldn't locate reliable information about whether defects existed or not, despite having a team of researchers working on the task and considerable support from our industry partners. So there are many, many stories about accessing data, and that data could be, data that you obtain via interviews. It could be from smart sensors in buildings that are reporting on water damage and defects. But this whole data space that we have around housing is very potted, to say the least. And then we've got this overarching issue of information asymmetry, of which a few economists won a Nobel Prize in 2001, defining this market asymmetry of information. So whether it's buyers and sellers having access to that information. So there are big wealths of data out there. If you've got deep pockets, you can go to some data providers and buy some data. But you'll find too, if you look into some of those data sets, you can't buy everything, even if you do have deep pockets. So there really is a lot of work to be done, we think collectively, around the future of housing data and analytical support to really make sure that when we're planning sustainable future housing, that we're doing it on the best available data and evidence for future generations. So here's our napkin drawing. So again, this was collaboratively put together by the team, solving housing challenges. So looking at unlocking access, fast, efficient approvals, accessing curated data. So I'm not going to go into all of those components there. You can see it, but really it's a problem facing those key actors in the housing system, whether it's academics trying to do the best research that they can, supported by data and evidence, whether it's government policymakers setting those policy levers, whether it's the housing industry, understanding supply and demand, what does it mean for builders in the supply chain, what does it mean for developers, and communities, for those who have to live in houses, whether it's in a neighbourhood which has been developed up, and we're seeing that now in Sydney around our transport-orientated development program. We have a lot of unhappy councils and neighbours about changes in density, but we've got this vexed problem now. We've got 1.2 million that's been set as a national target. Where is that housing going to go? Are we going to be building up in our existing urban fabric, addressing the missing middle, or are we going to be promoting greenfield development? And so it's how do we make these decisions? So data provides one piece of the jigsaw. So what we were tasked with doing, we set up 3 or so years ago, trying to think about how can we bring a platform to bear that better connects academics, government, industry, and communities to the best available data that we have and analytical tools and insights to help solve some of these challenges. So this was our sort of vision for RDAP that we set a couple of years ago. So you can tell me how far we've got. I'm going to peel back the layers of the onion and just go through what we've built so far, and there's still a huge amount of work to be done in this space. So very importantly, this was a very much a collaborative project with project partners. So when we set this up, Housing Australia didn't exist. It was NIFIC, and we had Hugh Hartigan as chair of our steering committee. So we had the huge support of NIFIC and other government agencies, ABS, AHW, because it's important to note there is housing data out there, and there's some amazing assets that ABS and AHW and others do provide, which enable us to do a lot of fantastic research. But there's only so far you can go when you're looking at aggregate level geographies, SA1, SA2, when data is released bi-yearly, maybe annually, and so forth. We had the fantastic support of the Australian Research Data Commons, ARDC, and of course, the terrific support of AURIN, Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, in helping really drive and support this initiative. A number of key partners, including, importantly, a suite of universities. We've had other universities involved that aren't labelled here, but these are the ones that were formerly part of the bid. So some fantastic work from University of South Australia supporting us, Curtin University, Swinburne University, University of Queensland, University of Canberra, ourselves at UNSW, University of Tasmania, and even the likes of the University of Sydney getting involved in developing some of the tools and infrastructure. I'll talk about that later on. Then some technical providers, AWS for some cloud support. So all the tools that we built are sort of in the cloud. The Alan Turing Institute, I'll talk about Colouring Cities, which is a global initiative that Matt Ning from UNSW has been coordinating, working with the Turing Institute out of the UK, and OmniLink, an SME providing digital support. Commonwealth Bank, also a key partner in this initiative. So very much a consortium approach. I am going to skip through to the components. What I'm going to go through here now are some of the technical components that we built over the 2 years. These digital assets, pretty much everything I'm going to present, you can access at your leisure via the URLs. So this is all public facing. So everything you see here, you can get access to. What we built is the National Housing Data Exchange. So I'm going to go through that. Then we've got Colouring Sydney, Colouring Australia. What does that mean? I'll give you a bit of a foray into that. There's a suite of analytic tools that we built, the What If tool, Envision, AHAT, Australian Property Market Explorer. I'll go through those tools. So the National Housing Data Exchange provides a gateway into housing data. So if you follow that URL, you'll come to a data portal like this. So it will either provide you to some data sets, a small number of data sets that the project has put together that don't exist somewhere else. But if they do exist, those data assets somewhere else, it will point you to those data assets. For example, if you're after building footprints, there's open source building footprints produced by Microsoft for Australia, and it will point to those. So if you want that sort of open source version, if you want to have a commercial product, we've got links to the commercial products too. There's a number of commercial products. Some councils have also provided building footprints freely available. So we're trying to provide access to those data sets related to housing that exist both in the private sector and also produced in government, and also by academics. For example, some work out of an Ahuri project with Ryan Vandeneulen looking at unmet housing needs that he had funded through the Community Housing Industry Association. He's deposited that data set here. And so if you want to access that data set, you can go into the National Housing Data Exchange and download that data set. So there's over 103 data sets that you can find at the moment. So that's as far as we could get in loading those data assets. There's more work to be done here, but it's a start. We've got data across 24 organisations. If anyone has some other data, it could just be the metadata that they'd like to share, with the housing research policymaking community. By all means, please get in touch with us after the presentation. If you want to send us a link, we can look at exploring how that might feed into the National Housing Data Exchange. So some of the work that Dr. Henry Peterson was looking at, and this actually, he's put together these maps, and this is, I guess, one of the data assets that we work towards as part of the project is a harmonised national view of rental bond data to try to help policymakers decision. Being able to understand what's the state of play in the rental market, which, as all aspects of housing, is a hot topic at the moment. So you'll see there, we've been able to find a number of rental bond board data sets across the country. There are various levels of aggregation. They're not standardised. Even putting this initial set together across these various jurisdictions, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, and Western Australia, provided its own challenges, shall we say. All jurisdictions collect the data differently, have different levels of maturity in how they outsource, make that data available. One of the sort of wins for RDAP was working with the Western Australian government, who weren't sharing any of their rental bond board data publicly at all. So now if you go through the National Housing Data Exchange, they're using that as the actual repository where they're sharing openly their rental bond board data. Other jurisdictions, you'll see there different ways they make that available, whether it's aggregated, whether it's anonymized, different levels of geography, and so forth. So it's the first version. It's far from ideal and complete, but even just being able to put together that snapshot, there's so many sort of levels to deal with. There's talking to the data custodians. There's the data agreements. It's trying to harmonize it on set attributes and fields. There's a lot of work there, both dealing with people and data custodians and jurisdictions, and every jurisdiction has its own view of what's shareable and so forth. But nonetheless, there is that data asset that's there. I see my pointers broken. That must be the end of the presentation. Right. Oh, you took the power off and you muted someone. Okay, so another data set we've been working on with a couple of our data scientists, and Bala's been involved in this one, was then starting to look at planning applications across the country. So we started harvesting all the planning applications across the country. And unsurprisingly, it's a mixed bag. What someone calls a development assessment application in one jurisdiction doesn't mean the same in another jurisdiction, and so forth. Various states provide this data openly. Some of it's via council websites. So we started to pull this data together. And so what we've set up as a proof of concept, we haven't finalized this quite yet, but we have a database that goes across 383 LGAs across the country. We've got over 200,000 planning approvals that are being automatically populated into this database. We've been running some AI across this now to understand how we can then automatically classify this. So what sort of development is covered in that planning assessment, and then being able to visualize that so you can start to see hotspots of development, what types of development are occurring where. So if you go to any of the sort of planning portals or council websites, it's quite challenging to get that spatial map and understand what's in the pipeline. So if we're looking at 1.2 million houses in the next 5 years, it's probably good to understand what planning approvals are actually in the pipeline. So we've done some work on that. Okay, so we then start to move into colouring cities. So some of you might be asking, what is colouring cities? And pretty much this comes out of University College London. Polly Hudson was looking at this as part of her PhD, and she's taken that to the Alan Turing Institute. And essentially, it's quite aligned in why we sort of joined forces with the Turing Institute on this. As in, if you imagine you've got the city from a data perspective, it's like a colouring in book. There's lots of colours that are missing, lots of attributes that are missing. So how can we work together to try and fill those data attributes? For example, building age. You might easily be able to get that for strata because there's a data register that has, you know, when strata buildings have been lodged since 1961. But you try and get that for sort of other housing types, and it's not a complete view. So, you know, building heights, views, all sorts of other data, how walkable a house might be, and how walkable a suburb might be. We'll come to that later on. So this is part of a global initiative where there's colouring cities being set up around the world in the UK, Lebanon, Germany, Bahrain, Greece, China, Indonesia. That list is growing. Since I put this together, Canada and other countries are getting involved. So as part of RDAP, we helped set up, and we did this in partnership with those universities I mentioned around the country to set up a community of practice around, we started with colouring, Perth, for example, working with Curtin University, working with University of Queensland around colouring Brisbane, working with Swinburne University, colouring Melbourne and so forth, University of South Australia for colouring Adelaide. And then access the best available open data on those cities that we could get, vectorized data, so the building footprints that I'm talking about, the Bing, Microsoft Bing footprints that I mentioned before. So we put this database together and it goes across about 13 million properties. And there's a number of data sets that are there. Again, there's sparse data across a number of these categories. You can go into colouring and start off colouring cities, individual cities. We sort of amalgamated that up to colouring Australia. So it also then picks up not just the major cities, but also, you know, Bendigo, Ballarat, smaller urban centres as well. So this is looking at some of the data in Adelaide. You'll see the sort of the green work there of looking at how that city was set up, and we got the grid pattern and the sort of the building footprints, but those dark areas are open space, so no buildings there. And then we've got Brisbane, lots of examples if you zoom into this, and you can access this at this resolution just by logging into Colouring Australia, and you can zoom in and out and look at various data sets. So for example, getting the neighbours' energy data, so what rating stars various buildings are, and you can then start to visualise that information. As an example, some work, one of our PhD students, Josephine, who might be on the call, is looking at walkability, and so being able to then map that and visualise that across various cities. So this is based on Josephine's walkability index, which comprises a number of elements, walking for employment, walking for recreational purposes and so forth. The overall index is here. And so using the Colouring Cities platform, we can propagate this across multiple cities, both in Australia and internationally. Okay, so I want to briefly now go through some of the digital tools that we also built as part of RDAP. So we've built the Australian Property Market Explorer, give you a whirlwind tour of that, and that was led by Bala. And then we've got some other tools, What If, working with Yi from City Futures, Envision. We've got Steve Glacken from Swinburne University, has been sort of leading this, and Bill and Lawrence, Randolph Lawrence Troy, University of Sydney, been leading the affordable housing assessment tool. So very much a collaborative effort of taking those insights and that expertise and that knowledge in these tools by those various tool custodians. So the Australian Property Market Explorer, as the label says, provides a window into the property market. Again, this is possible for New South Wales, and Barla's built this for New South Wales because that data is made openly available by the Valuer General's office. So a lot of this work is not possible from a research perspective if that data is not open. But again, I guess these sorts of approaches could be applied on other data sets if we could broker license and access to those data sets. So there's a very much a whirlwind tour. I think Barla gives an hour lecture presentation on this. He's run it with the Australian Property Institute and so forth. So I'm going to cover it in about 1 minute. So basically what we've got is a view into Valuer General's sales registry across residential. You can also look at office sales and other data across time, space and time. So going back a number of years, we can visualize that at an aggregate level. And then we can get down to quite fine scale units here. Then we can start to then visualize. So the building height there is actually not the height of buildings per se. It's the volume of transactions. So we've got different colors based on how expensive the property is and then the number of transactions. So again, this is another way of visualizing this property information and seeing where a lot of activity might be occurring. And then you could also then go back and see what's happening in previous years to get a sense of what's happening in the property market across the city or across the state. So we had grand visions that this would be applied across the country. We tried to apply this in Adelaide, and as far as I'm going to say is dealing with the South Australian government. We didn't have the same experience as when we were dealing with the New South Wales government and getting this data. Suffice to say, we don't have this for Adelaide after many, many conversations for about a year. So this is one of the challenges when you're trying to look at this data nationally. Different jurisdictions have different views of release and so forth. It's not consistent. So you sort of wonder, how do we deal with housing nationally and have a consistent empirical data-driven approach when the jurisdictions are very different in how they sort of share data, don't share data, and so forth. Okay, the Envision tool. So this particular tool was originally funded through the CRC for Spatial Information and Frontier SI. Pettit, Newton, and Steve Glacken have been working on this tool for many years. So we're looking at sort of revamping this tool. It was supported through Oren for a while. And basically it does simple sort of multi-criteria analysis. And really, again, I'm not going to give this justice in this presentation. There's presentations that Steve and others have on its use. It's been widely used in Maroondah around greening the grey fields. In fact, the broader concept of greening the grey fields now has been legislated in Victoria. And what the tool does is sort of identify spot redevelopments that are occurring, and then arguing if we were looking at spot redevelopments, maybe councils and government should be trying to look at some shape or form getting property owners to work together so we can unlock better precinct level benefits, whether it's more open space and so forth, and being able to understand and map that and then look at sort of what those situations are. Again, I'm flying through this very quick. So what if, again, not a new tool, created by Professor Richard Klosterman, Akron, Ohio in the late 1990s. It's been used in 22 countries. It's been used in Australia to various degrees, in Western Australia, in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. And it's a tool. This is a sort of potted history. But that's also one of the challenges with a project like this is you've got software. Software becomes old very quick these days. And so you need to constantly, update it. And so there's been 4 recodings of What If over 20 years. And I guess that's one of the challenges when you're dealing with software and analytics. So the version that we built, it's online, and we've set it up with all our tools with a user manual. So if you go onto the website, the tools, you see the user manual, and there's some demo data that you can download. So Ipswich has a lot of really good open data around their city. So we went about setting up a demo data set for Ipswich. Is also, like many parts of Australia, expected to have a lot of population growth, going up to almost doubling by 2046. So again, at a more micro level than the country, we're well-placed locations in Ipswich for future housing, having this sort of data-driven tool to support that, where you can do suitability analysis, bring in demand information through population projections, employment projections, and then do a simple, in this case, simple land use allocation. And the final tool is the affordable housing assessment tool that's being put together for two key end user groups, affordable housing practitioners who might want to understand sort of costing under various policy scenarios of affordable housing, whether it's social housing and so forth, or policymakers who want to test changing some of those different subsidy arrangements. So this is work that Bill and Lawrence have been working on for quite some time. And what we've got is a toolkit that goes over a number of sort of workflow elements, from putting in your dwelling needs, project details, market context, including costings and stamp duty. There's a residual land value model in there, and then you can look at various scenarios, revenue outputs. Again, I'm not going to do justice to this in a couple of minutes, but again, there's also a user manual and some dummy data you can have a look at. Okay, so that's what we built in the last 2 years, pretty much. It's all available. If you go on the RDAP website, there's a series of URLs. You can have a look at those tools. Some of the analytics, because Hazel is actually heading up the user advisory group here, because, okay, you build it. Are they going to use it? How are they using it? And trying to get some metrics on that, both from the user advisory group, taking the tools to the group, getting them tested, getting feedback. And then here we've just got some very sort of crude analytics of how many users that we've had, hit our homepage, how many users are hitting our various tools, and so forth. Then we can get down to data sets, which data sets are being downloaded and used and so forth. It would be good to get some better user stories, because I was out there talking to a number of industry players time to time, various meetings, and you find that people are finding housing data from here. I'm not going to name particular companies, but I know researchers, even product managers, project managers from a number of housing related companies, are coming in and accessing data. So it's breaking down, we feel, some of those barriers to access to data and dealing with this information asymmetry issue. But we're only really touching the tip of the iceberg here. Some of the tools, AHAT we released quite recently, so I haven't got a Google Analytics report on that. But you can see the What If tool. We've had over 57 people set up their own What If project. We've got breakdown how many of those are academic. We've got just as many, if not more, from government, and we've got quite a few from corporate as well. APME, Bala's tool is the winner so far. We've got 67 users, and you can see the breakdown there. And the Envision tool, we have 13. I will say we have launched these all sequentially different periods of time, and so Envision is the newest of the three of these tools. Okay, so what has been achieved? So we've launched the beginning, the beta version of a national housing data exchange. We have over 100 data assets that are mapped in there. It's only a start. I showed you we've got version 1 of a harmonised rental bond board data set for Australia. More work needs to be done. There's a lot of lessons learned. I talked a little bit about some of those with that data set. There's a need, I think, to harmonise many, many more housing data sets to support, federal government policy decision making. And so we've got a number of lessons learned there. We've launched the Colouring Australia platform, and that's open. And we've got PhD students like Josephine being able to build in various models and analytics into the toolkit. And we've launched a suite of housing analytics tools, the What If tool, the Vision tool, the AHAT tool, the APME tool. So some key learnings, national harmonisation and accessible housing data assets, and making those, it's difficult to do. We had aspirations of bringing in more national data sets and harmonising those and working with the states and jurisdictions to do so collaboratively for the betterment of the country. We got so far. A lot of the barriers, most of the barriers are not technical. They're governance barriers, they're legal barriers, they're people-based barriers that are in the way of unlocking more data or being able to work on harmonised data solutions and national views of various data assets. And, you know, just to restate this and emphasise it from a research perspective, accessing government data, which is not open access, is a major barrier to housing research innovation, whether it's research being conducted in universities, research being done in consultancies to support government, or even research internally within industry. It is a major barrier. We do have a lot of good open data assets that we've captured, most of those or a lot of those in RDAP related to housing. So, you know, compared to some countries, we do have a lot of open data, but there's a lot more that we need. Interestingly, I believe in the Netherlands, they have a policy of fast tracking access for any researchers to access housing data. It's written in their legislation. And so I think we need to look at some of these best practices to unlock, you know, some of these data assets, because many researchers in the room and online and at these conferences the last few weeks will spend huge amounts of time just chasing data when they could be doing more work on analysing the data, coming up with insights. I think we spend about 80% of our time chasing data. And, you know, then you actually speak to a data custodian. It takes you 6 months to get the data agreement in place. And I think it'd be interesting to actually analyse how long these data agreements actually take all the way through to fruition. And then you might have a project that, you know, needs to refresh that data in a year or two. You have to go back and start the whole process again. So, you know, I think we have massive work to do as a country to really, you know, make that data accessible. And I don't mean making it completely publicly accessible. It's accessible for that particular question, that research group and so forth. Many government agencies are still reluctant to share data. And it's very interesting when trying to do this nationally, being based in New South Wales, we have a lot to do with the New South Wales government. And fortunate for us, while it's not perfect, we do have access to a wide range of data sets in New South Wales. Trying to talk to other jurisdictions was interesting. Different jurisdictions have different protocols for release, so related to that point, and different levels of data maturity and support. It may be they just haven't funded someone to be the data custodian. It may be that there actually isn't a person who is named the data custodian of that particular asset. It may be their legal department is super risk adverse, and so they don't want to release it. Risk management. At the same time, we've noticed in this project the last few years the rise of corporatisation of government data sets, i.e. the rise of land registry services around the country. And so we've seen the privatisation of core housing data assets from government. And I guess just from the perspective of dealing with some of those new entities, we see that creates a new conversation. And I guess I'll say just broadly from our experience at RDAP, trying to work with some of those new data custodians has provided some challenges in timely delivery, and actually even just understanding what R&D and innovation is. And it's not the same as selling a data set to a big bank when you're dealing with a university, you know. There's a lot in that, but I'll just leave it there. The term platform urbanism that Sarah Barnes sort of termed and has written a book on, I think it's an interesting sort of consideration in this space. I mean, we talked about a number of platforms here as part of RDAP, a constellation of platforms. You know, really, there's not one platform to rule them all. There's suites of platforms that are being built with various tools, and other tools like OpenStreetMap in the open space. And then there's a lot of proprietary platforms which have very valuable, useful data. But what we need to look at is that interoperability across these platforms, both the technical interoperability and the actual, people interoperability, getting access to some of those platforms, and the discoverability of those data assets. And what is absolutely critical is collaboration, being able to do things to solve these challenges that are facing society. So next steps. So we see what we built as an infrastructure. We had the support of NIFIC, we had ABSHW involved, many government people, federal government, state government were involved in the project, coming along to various meetings. But really, I guess, ideally, we would see this data asset taken to the next level to support Housing Australia, to help decisions around the Housing Future Fund. We'd see that the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council, using RDAP to help make decisions about policy and decisions. We'll be looking at continuing to work with jurisdictions on contributing their data and also their use of digital housing assets. So how can some of the jurisdictions, we're working with one jurisdiction quite closely at the moment to use What If to help with sort of their housing strategy. So how do we then, have jurisdictions use some of these tools, and also other academics contribute tools into this ecosystem. So we're not reinventing the wheel, and we can actually, have that knowledge translation. If someone creates a new widget or a tool, that it's actually available and it's used. And then we see next steps working more closely with the community housing sector to assist them with data and insights. We hope that RDAP has started the conversation, providing a connector between all the different actors, between government, industry, academia, for sharing various data assets and jointly building innovative solutions. Okay, so very, very high level, next horizon. Our funding for RDAP in its current form, the initiative has been delivered. So stage 1 of RDAP is complete. There's a couple of sort of other initiatives. Obviously, we just love the federal government or whatever to come in and, put in the next 4 or 5 years of funding to keep it going. Just watch this space, I don't know. But what we do have is a Housing Insights Lab initiative that we've been working on. I can't really say much about it. It's quite New South Wales focused in working with key players in Tech Central Precinct. So an opportunity there to try and take some of this work forward. And working with colleagues at Macquarie University, there's an initiative that we're all collectively trying to get up called PropTech, which is very much about the digital rails for property and real estate. And so there's an opportunity there that a number of us, 2 universities, Macquarie, ourselves, University of Queensland, University of Adelaide, probably a couple of others, a number of industry players, government players are looking at trying to take a 10-year horizon view around the digital rails and how we deal with some of that connectivity, how do we apply that to unlocking access and looking at demand for housing, and also the other dimension that RDAP hasn't really got too much into is the financialisation of housing. So these are a couple of things. Watch this space. I can't really say much more, but if you are interested in the PropTech, there's a prospectus there, there's a link, and happy to talk more about that or take any general questions. Or if others from RDAP want to chip in, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So we've got about 15 minutes now for questions. So if anyone's got any questions or comments, either in the room or online.
Friday afternoon, no one wants to.
I'll make a comment just while I'm waiting for the first question. As a supporting player in the project, Chris, I think you've explained a lot of the challenges that were faced in the project, and there were many. But I think that what the project has done and can continue to do is really valuable, because what it's done is it's made not only data available, but also tools available to allow people like local governments, like community housing providers, like banks, like developers, to really quickly work on some scenarios, right? Work on, well, what might happen if we did this, or how about we look at this area? What's going on there? What does that mean in terms of our next decision? Much more easily than they would have been able to otherwise. And so, you know, it's not perfect, and in many cases it's not complete, but I still think it's a really valuable contribution, not least because a lot of the discussion around housing lately has been around housing supply and numbers, and not so much around the quality of what we're delivering, where we're delivering it, whether we're delivering the right thing, and whether we've thought through all of the options before we do that. So, you know, I think this is valuable. So, well done, team. And I can say that because I pretty much just managed the user advisory group and didn't do much else.
Yeah, thanks, Hazel. Yeah, look, yeah, that hopefully we've left a legacy in what's being built, and you know, all the tools are still there. Well, stage one is finished. We're not turning the tools off; they're there. The data sets are there. I guess we're just looking at what does stage two mean. Bruce,
Are all the data sets open access or some proprietary type products?
the actual data sets that we have in there are open, but if you go into the National Housing Data Exchange, for example, it will point to, it might have registered a proprietary data set. And that, you know, so as I was saying about building footprints, there's open, you know, building footprints, and you can go download those. We did for Colouring Australia. But if you want a commercial-based building footprint product, it will provide you a link to that provider. We don't negotiate free access, or you have the user. But I guess we wanted to at least have that landscape. So, you know, there are commercial data sets out there, and they've been around and they're maturing. So being able to search those and discover those more easily is important too.
Thanks.
So that was one of the first clarifications that the user advisory group had, actually, was, you know, is the data exchange a place for depositing data or for pointing to data? And it's both. So some of the data sets are deposited there, they're open access, and some of them are actually pointing to other people's data sets, like a search engine.
I'd like to ask also, because I remember at the start you were mentioning the four different, you know, the pie diagram, 4 different people, the academia, the government, and so on. So for the general community, and also for like policymakers, I'm imagining that in the process of getting all this data together, there's a lot of like wisdom that's been accumulated, understandings of how things work, particularly on the big problem about the high prices. Things to do with land banks or taxing, land tax, or things to do with how regulations impact. A lot of this like wisdom has been absorbed. So is there any future plan for generally sharing that sort of wisdom to policymakers who might not be familiar with using tools and things, just generally sort of giving these like rules of thumbs about how quality uplift works, just basic concepts and ideas to people who might not be familiar through really basic things?
I guess it's probably the role for, I guess this is a platform. There's the training and education, I guess, off that with people with the wisdom. I'd argue it's people that really need to have the wisdom, and you know, you got your data, information, knowledge, hierarchy, and wisdom. But I guess, you know, for example, Bala ran a session in the Australian Property Institute. So there's a whole bunch of discussions around what does that data mean, and valuers, how would land valuers see that data, interpret that data, use that data. So I think it's that sort of people, expert person, data connection combined that needs to be explored. You know, various universities like ours, you know, you can do a myriad of courses, like around value uplift, residual land value, Macquarie University, wherever. You know, you can do these courses. So yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that the training and outreach around this is also, you know, something that we looked at a little bit, but again, you know, it comes down to resourcing. You know, by making it open, we hope that some, you know, Industry associations, will continue to use it as a source when they're running accreditation programs. Lecturers, academics can use the tools in teaching courses. Maybe think tanks can access some of the tools to create maps or other data snapshots that they can use in reports.
So I just got a question from like the second slide and towards the end. It's just an amalgamation of both of those. So you talked about the Housing Insights Lab and how it will come forward, right? And also about the housing crisis that exists currently in Australia. So I was thinking like, because sustainability is a very entrenched concept right now, will circular economy concepts and regenerative urbanism, that line, be included in your insights or in your research or analysis?
I like to say yes. I think this is a sort of a research infrastructure and platform. So it's like also needs those champions in those specific areas to sort of be driving the data and analytics around that. So I mean, there's many researchers in, say, the School of Built Environment here. They're doing a lot of good work around sort of net zero cities or in other, places. So how would you use, for example, colouring cities as a platform there to start measuring net zero cities? We started to bring in as a sort of a exemplar, sort of the neighbours energy rating, because we could get that available as an Excel spreadsheet from their website. So I guess it's sort of some of this infrastructure too is there to be shaped. It's quite sort of embryonic at the moment, and so it's there for researchers to sort of take forward. Later, sort of point at sort of sustainable mobility or walkability. Josephine's work, so that's her work. She's brought that in to the infrastructure. So the concept of walkability, plugs in there. And for some people, decision of housing, walkability is a key consideration. They want to be buying in a place or living in a place or renting a place, whatever that is walkable and is livable. So I think it's really up to the researchers and the community to also build that. You're right, in circular economy, sustainability, people see applications in this, at those dimensions, then that would be fantastic.
Just a question with regards to the community you mentioned, like you're opening it up for the public, right? So have you considered like the different groups of buyers, for example, like international people, like since Australian population is mostly from immigration, right? So since there are limitations for immigrants to buy into properties, have you considered like the setting up the properties, like who can buy or who cannot buy?
No. I mean, as in not this, as in not that is beyond the role of what we had. I mean, that's a very interesting sort of analysis. Or thought who could use this. Yeah. I mean, it's at the moment everything is publicly available, but it's there, use it as it is, sort of thing. We had the mandate to set this up as it is, and then I guess that sort of scenario in question of how it could be used to support or not support or to test policies around international investment in housing. That again would be sort of an application.
So just riffing off that and asking a question I probably should know the answer to, but answering that question would require layering a few different data sets on top of each other to be able to answer it, which would probably require development of a tool. So if someone in the community were to come to you and say, well, you've got these data sets and I can see that if we were to layer them together, I could answer this question. Are you open to people pitching tool ideas to RDAP from external, or is the idea that you would?
I think that's a possibility, yeah, for sure.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
It's actually been set up to be extensible, right? So we've got 4 tools. If someone wanted to build a new tool and put it there, then that's a possibility. Like without getting, Bala and Ali and Henry can talk about the it's a micro
And it's not easy to create, sure.
And it's, you know, but if there was a desire to have a tool and have it hosted or co-hosted in here, then that would be possible. But I guess that will require, you know, a new sort of related project to bolt in.
Yeah. I'll add to the discussion which had started earlier about like getting these data sets and tools into the practice and people thinking about them and like using them. So one of the things which I would like I want to do and like wanted to do is with APME is like get like a simple, understandable index flowing for the data in them. So since it is like such a multi-dimensional data in that visualization, we kind of try to manage to show it, visualize it in a simple way. But then you can further make an index kind of a thing, which people can watch, people can link to, refer to, which so Chris Martin has done work on the rental vulnerability index that we recently published that visualization as well. So that kind of like gives a one index for rental vulnerability across postcodes, which summarizes it and becomes easy to discuss, easy to see and track. Something like that. Like that would be my idea for like making that happen. So for APME specifically, having an index, say what's that index for that over a period of time, and it becomes easier for, and then it slowly gets into the people's day-to-day use of the tool. Saying, okay, so I want to know what's happening there. I open up APME, see what's like, that one index, and then it summarizes the whole multi-dimensional thing that's happening there.
So I love all of this stuff and I contribute towards it as often as I can. And I'm always surprised that more people don't know about all of the stuff that is on this. But from if the corporates or people with dollars wanted to engage with this, you kind of have a platform, and on one side of it, you've got the people that built it and all the people that know how to use it. You kind of have all of the answers and all of the wisdom, right? But I don't know this second who to ask which question to. But if I'm sitting on the corporate side, what I've got is all of the problems and all of the money, right? And what you actually have is something like a matching market problem. It's a search problem. And so something that Zillow did in the US that I found very interesting was they ran a Kaggle competition to try and improve their price prediction model using machine learning. And it was $1 million prize. And the person that won it got to be their head of data science. And they got $1 million, right? And so is there a way that we could get, say, companies with problems to pitch you to say, here's, I would pay $100,000, $200,000, $500,000 to solve this problem if we can kind of use the solution? Is that like a mechanism that is possible, or are there sort of...
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. One of the reasons that I'm asking is I know that there is a lot of complexity to the funding of research, where it comes from, etc. And then I'm not sure about some of the data sources, but that should be kind of impounded within the how you would approach solving the problem, because the people that built this understand what they can and cannot do, and would get the sign-offs associated with it. So, because I was talking to someone this week about the Strata database, and that is the only one that I know of, and it's millions of dollars. There's huge corporate stuff happening in that space, and they didn't know that there was a Strata database on your website, which I thought was crazy. And so, yeah, it's more sort of how do the corporate engage to get access to the answers in a way that would be palatable to the university and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, the corporate is one of the end users, you know, in our key actors. But how we engage is, I guess, from a city's perspective, is an interesting challenge. I think even just from universities, because in OECD, why is Australia ranked very low in being able to innovate and, you know, commercialize or work with private sector? So any ideas, you know, I guess we're keen for this to continue as a platform. We've had initial government support, and so there was quite a focus because we had federal government support, to support those partners in the consortium. But yeah, I mean, if there's an opportunity to provide better information to to industry to make better decisions around housing and decisions. And if there's that gap, then we can help fill it, then that'd be good to explore.
Then my sort of price discovery hat is it's like you're kind of not sure what the value of it is necessarily. So it's kind of how do you auction off a public asset to optimally discover price? And that's kind of a market design sort of problem. Anyway, I don't have a solution for that, but I do know that they had a lot of luck selling radio frequencies using different types of auction mechanism that might be applicable for this.
Well, it's good. I mean, but even just opening it up to like, you know, a hackathon or, you know, I guess we had limited resources in here. This phase one was really build it, a lot of resource to actually get it to that point. And then you go, oh, we built it now. What do we, you know, we've got some user manuals and we're presenting it at conferences. But yeah, I guess that's also one of the learnings, you know, being able to look at this and how do you make sure you've got that knowledge exchange and awareness?
Well, talking about limited resources, I'm afraid it's 5 o'clock. So we do have to thank Grace.
Great. So we have to talk more over a nibble and a refreshment.
Yeah. So just a reminder, the seminars are every 2 weeks. The next seminar will be on the 8th of March when Dr. Rupert Nguyen and Dr. Lawrence Try will be talking about the breakdown of urban citizenship and spatial reordering of the cities. So thank you very much again, Chris.
One last year.